Hey everyone! Today I'm leading you through my interpretation of Ibby Zaboy's Pride by showing you how I turned this book on its head through my portrayal of Zuri and Darius combined with aspects of their personal stories. Pride is a modern-day take on the classic Pride and Prejudice that includes every character being a person of color. The story follows young Zuri, who has pride for her hometown and will stop at nothing to protect it. But bigger gentrifying forces are at work when the wealthy Darcys move in across the street. Darius Darcy is a judgmental rich boy that Zuri wants nothing to do with, but eventually the two find common ground and fall in love. In this tale, Zaboy combines the struggle of gentrification and cultural identity within these two characters as they find a way to navigate their young adult lives and make readers question what we all take pride in. I wanted to do this project over Pride because of the unique retelling aspect from a much different cultural background, but also to question the aspect of single stories and how they take part in this novel. While doing this project, I kept going back and forth on whether or not this novel actually does revoke the idea of single stories when considering Darius and Zizi. I discovered my argument by first looking to Zuri and her aspirations for herself in the book, and then looking to see how Darius affected or changed those. Then I analyzed both Zuri and Darius separately as their own being. Eventually, I decided that the novel does both revoke and inhabitate the trend of single stories. I wanted to show both sides of this single story, and how our two main characters defy and align with stereotypes within the novel and society as a whole. Since his analyzation was so heavily dependent on Zuri and Darius, I figured it would be fitting to make them the focal point of my interpretation. I wanted this argument to be split solely between the two of them, hence the split down the middle, with Zizi on one side and Darius on the other. After that, I wanted to consider all the cultural ties and backgrounds that our two main characters carried with them through the story. So depending on how I interpreted their stories and life aspects alter where I place them in the multimodal drawing. Examples of this are Zizi's cultures represented with the Haitian and Dominican Republic flags, and money behind Darius. These aspects and many others on my text help me to understand the single story aspect of this novel and project. At the beginning of the novel, we meet the prideful Zuri, who is very proud of her Afro-Latina roots. I knew I wanted to include this aspect of her because of how many readers today do not have a character that they can relate to in a racial or cultural way. Zuri's heritage and her pride for it are the first thing that signifies that she is not a typical product of a single story. I drew the flags on a string that are surrounded by music notes and differing colors. I really wanted to embed the culture that is Bushwick, since that plays into Zizi's character. Having these placed behind her also allude to the fact that she is always welcome to her hood, even when she leaves for college. This reference for her leaving to college leads me to my first quote on her side. "This college is a lifeboat and a lifeline." This quote is from the end of the novel, when Zuri already knows that she is having to leave her Bushwick community. We know from the entire novel that she always plans to return to her hood since it is such a big part of her life. Unlike her sister, who wants to continue her life away in her college university and see where college will take her. Zuri, again, is fighting the single-story stereotype of minorities in low-income communities. It's almost every day that we see people that fall under this demographic receive pity because they aren't expected to make it out of their community, much less want to return to it. Towards the bottom of the right side, I included Zuri's laptop. I placed it here to reference that her future is with writing and with college. The novel uses her writing and poems to exemplify the dreams and hope that Zuri encompasses to live outside of the hood. On the computer screen, I included the following quote. "Sometimes love is not enough to keep a community together. There has to be something more tangible, like fair housing, opportunities, and access to resources." Zaboy uses this quote to reference our society today and the gentrification efforts that are happening everywhere, as well as bringing light to the norm of the unfair amount of opportunities for every class. I felt this quote was important to the challenge of a single story because it actually calls out the issues. where so many single stories today just assign the issues to characters that will never surpass or correct them. I also included a window with a starry sky behind Zuri. The novel has a lot of focus on windows and is always looking towards the future or looking back to your history. I wanted this placement to be in her past because it leaves her on a hopeful note at the end of the novel. I regard Zuri as the counterstory aspect of this novel, showing she has dreams and aspirations despite what demographic she was born into. Windows also play a big part with Darius. On the left side of Darius's face, I included a straight and narrow portrayal of this portion of his house, including him standing in the second-story window as readers so often read him. Along with this image, I included 2 quotes. The first being, "I look up and see Darius still standing in the window." I went a little deep with analyzing how Darius could be an example of a single story. A kind of stereotypical view on the affluent people is that they are always above the lower class. So the visualization of having Darius's figure in the second-story window looking down on Zizi helped me portray that. The second quote I included was, "It's a mini mansion now." Again, highlighting on the gentrification theme of the novel, I wanted this quote included to show the change that Darius has had on Zizi's life and hood. I also wanted to include an aspect of wealth around Darius, and what better way to do that than with dollar bills. I placed these behind him to insinuate that he comes from money, and that it is his background, even if that isn't what makes him him. The money is surrounded by another quote, "You do know there are black people in the world who have money." This quote is from a conversation with Zuri and her sister when they are discussing how surprised they were that the Darcys were rich. This again falls under the single-story aspect that society has placed upon black people, and just people of color in general. Even Zuri, who is a woman of color herself, was believing the single story that black people couldn't be rich before she met Darius. To summarize the rest of Darius's character, I included another quote from when Zuri is critiquing his grandmother's possessions. He responds to her with, "My family has worked hard for them," showing again that he isn't a part of the single story that Zuri has already categorized him into. The final aspect I wanted to include in this multimodal text was the inclusion of color. Toward the bottom middle of the drawing, I included some graffiti from actual images of Bushwick. There is a scene in the novel where Zuri is judging Darius for photographing the graffiti like a tourist. I felt it was important to include this aspect spilling over into Darius's half of the image to show how both characters start to defy the single-story aspect of each other. We know that both of them judge the other on many occasions, so I wanted it to be evident that there was still a border between a counter and single story, even if they were breaking down those barriers. The biggest challenge I had for this project was finding a way to decide whether or not the novel encourages single stories or pushes counter stories. But when I was trying to find ways of showing the 2 characters' lives in images, I realized just how much information and culture that Zaboy had used when describing Zuri, and just how little she had included with Darius. It reminded me of how we get so used to the black and white regular version of single stories, and don't stop to consider how diverse our counter stories can be. The more I analyzed the story, the more I realized this theme of separation between the 2 characters. Then I considered that maybe other readers of the novel had thought that too, and I questioned just how many novels we read that try to counter the single story, but too often fall back into singularity with other characters.